I'm really excited to be able to have a conversation today with Jim Randall. Jim is the co-founder and the CEO of Auxano Consulting, and he is the senior lead navigator for Church Unique. Jim, thanks so much for joining us today for a conversation about Church Unique.
And thank you so much for having us. Looking forward to it.
So first, I want to talk a little bit about your title. It's kind of a unique title, this lead navigator for Church Unique. Why not just consultant? Why did you choose the name Navigator? What does that really mean?
Yeah, that was a big decision for us early on. And really there was a couple of things involved there. First and foremost, there had been a kind of a cultural stigma been within the local church with the word consultant. The stigma was that a consultant was going to come from the outside and tell you what to do, how to do it. They had a magic little box of tricks that they were going to pull out, and churches really, and pastors and leaders really kind of found a distaste toward that. It kind of became this little bit of a tension, right? And so there's a cultural world, but to be honest with you, that wasn't the main reason. The main reason is because we see ourselves as more of a strategic outsider, someone who walks along and journeys with the team, with the senior leadership, helping them to kind of discover what God has given to both them as a leader, but also to the church that they're serving. And so we felt the idea of being a navigator really just communicated in a much more clear way the relationship that we want to have with the churches that He's called us to serve.
Yeah, and that, I think, it kind of gets right back to the Church Unique title, right? It is drawing out the uniqueness of that church, not just to try to say, here's a cookie cutter program that you guys are going to do just like everybody else, the church down the street. For those of our church leaders that aren't really familiar with the Church Unique process, why don't you unpack a little bit of what that is? What is the Church Unique process, and how do you work to draw, how does the Navigator work to kind of draw out that uniqueness from the church?
Yeah, great question. The Church Unique process was, when you think about any process or anything that you want to provide to an organization, you want to think in terms of what's the problem that's trying to be solved, right? And so the problem that we found very early on, that ministry leaders, and at the time, like myself, serving 17 years on church staff myself, it was this thing we called the vision vacuum, right? That churches really struggled with being able to articulate, being able to have a clear understanding of who they were, and quite frankly, where they were going as a church. As a matter of fact, the number one phrase that a church that's caught up in this vision vacuum is when lay people and leaders and people who are part of the church would say something like, I just don't know where we're headed as a church. I don't know who we are. We trying to be this church, we trying to be that church. And really, God gave birth to the vision framing process that's embedded within Church Unique. And it really does just that. It walks alongside, we walk alongside with leaders, with pastors, and help them to discover that unique identity and that unique direction where God has taken the church. And really the easiest way, and kind of almost even the fastest way to unpack the process itself, is that the goal is to help leaders, to help churches be able to answer what we call the 5 irreducible questions of leadership. And if a leader, if a church can answer those questions with just that just stunning clarity and that tight language, and then can just send that out to their congregation, we keep finding time over time that the churches are thriving, beginning to thrive through that. And so here are those 5 irreducible questions of leadership that really kind of answer your question, Ben. The first one is answers question what? What are we doing? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And in that case, we're helping the church discover its unique mission statement. What is the Great Commission communicated in a culturally relevant way for that local church within their context? And so we're helping them to craft a mission statement that just really kind of expresses that and answers ultimately, what are we trying to accomplish? The second one is question why. Why are we doing it? It's the why behind the what. It's the why behind our mission. Why do we do what we do? What's the culture? What's the ethos of our church and of our organization? What do we want to kind of be known for? And what do we stand for? Not necessarily from the theological side, but what do we stand for as it relates to how we're going to connect, how we're going to make sure that God and that the expression of God is fully being realized within our local congregation and within our context. And so we love the idea of answering question why for values. The third question is question how. Question how answers how are we doing it, or how are we accomplishing the mission? If you'll notice, everything pings off of mission. Missions, question what.
Yeah.
Values are the why behind the what, and strategy is how are we accomplishing the what on a greatest level. And so in this world of kind of helping churches think through how to strategically reach people for Christ and to disciple them, that's what we're doing whenever we're helping them to develop a clear strategy for their church. And then the fourth side of the frame that we talk about on the outside of the frame is question when. When are we successful at accomplishing the mission? Once again, pinging off that mission. When are we being successful at accomplishing the mission? And really, quite frankly, ministry leaders have been trapped for decades, if not centuries, into only measuring how many people are in attendance for worship,
right,
how many people give, how many people are in groups. And to be honest with you, right now, people are freaking out because that's a hard thing to measure. And so measures really for this side of the frame really talks and thinks about those impact results and those output results of life transformation that happen into somebody. And then the fifth part of the frame is actually inside the frame, and it's the idea of vision, and it answers question where. Where is God taking us? Where do we want to be a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, maybe even 7 years from now? Where is God taking us? So the church unique process is different because we really want to discover that from the inside out, but we want every leader that's a part of the ministry and the organization to have that alignment of being able to answer those 5 questions and all be on the same page. Can you imagine a church that has that kind of alignment where you got 10 leaders, 20 leaders, 30 leaders, maybe even 100 leaders that can all answer the same 5 irreducible questions of leadership? Quite frankly, Ben, that's where I think synergy really begins to take off.
Yeah, and you answered one of the things I was going to ask is kind of what sets it apart, and I think that's what you're talking about. You use the term stunning clarity, and by answering those 5 questions and really drawing out those answers from the uniqueness of that church, the call that God has given that unique church, and by answering those questions, you're going to push away that vision vacuum and help them to go further. I'm wondering if you can give me a little bit of an idea, kind of generally, what is the kind of transformation that you see a church showing? What kind of a transformation do they go through when you're able to kind of provide them with that clarity, which allows them to get that alignment with their, their leadership team and their whole church membership all going in the same direction? What kind of transformation does that bring to a church?
Ben, I'm not going to lie to you. There are days I wake up and I want to pinch myself for the opportunity that I have, and that our team has, and that church navigators around the United States have. That every day we get to be a part of churches seeing real change take place, and real growth take place, and real health take place. For years, I have been a part of various things where we talk about what we want to accomplish or what we want to do. And it's always this aspiration that there's not a clear path forward. And man, the church unique process really brings that to fruition. It really allows us to celebrate that. And I get to wake up and read stories on social media and get text and to just see, Navigator and church leader after church leader talk about the differences that are being made. And you know what? I mean, it'll start with kind of some of the biggest differences are cultural differences that'll take place in a church. I would say a large percentage of churches that are saying yes to the church unique process are kind of realizing they've come to that point. Listen, we can't keep doing things the same way and expect different results. We've got to begin to look at things differently and address things differently. And so the church unique process is a change process. When a church articulates, typically speaking, in a new, refreshing way, and answers those 5 irreducible questions of leadership, and they begin to integrate that into everything that they do, Ben, they're a different church a year later. They're a different church 3 years later. I've seen churches that were middle class, middle class to upper class, primarily Caucasian congregations. Go, listen, we don't reflect the community where God has us, and something's got to change, and go through this process and become a completely different church. And I mean that not just in their posture, but in their face and in their presence, that it becomes a true multicultural, a true multiracial, a true multi-ethnic church. That is a phenomenal thing to see. And so I think of churches like South Cliff in Houston. I think of churches like New Hope in Fayetteville, Georgia. I think of churches like Colonial Heights in Jackson. I begin to think about churches that sit there and say, hey, listen, we know culturally we need to be a different church. So cultural change is a big one. Another one is kind of a missional change that we see happening. A lot of churches that are kind of caught in that just inward focus. They're just, they're really kind of almost insulated in almost a bubble from a world that is day by day, becoming further and further away from God. And those churches are going, hey, listen, we gotta change some things. And so we began to have conversations with churches like a Center Point in Southern California, right? Or a Harvest Church in Billings, Montana. And you begin to talk to these churches and you begin to move them through this process. And all of a sudden there's a light bulb that goes off and that says, hey, we gotta, if words, we talk a lot at Auxano about how in the church unique process, we believe words create worlds. And so if we really believe words create worlds, and if we really, we really work at that, then we really ask the question, what words do we use to create the world that we believe God wants us to pursue? And so creating words that are more missional, and we begin to see churches have 10, 15% increase in baptism, to begin to have people absolutely passionate about stepping into growing into the Word and become more of someone who is living the Word of God where they are. I think of one of our churches up in Chesapeake, Virginia, a missional mission statement. I love the way they communicate. Living life captivated and changed by Jesus. And they talk about how when that changes them, it's going to change them from the inside out. Ben, I could do this all day, and I know we only have a certain amount of time, but and let's just be honest with you, all of us are thinking about what's our return on investment, right? Are we going to see more people come to Christ? Are we going to see more people growing in the relationship with Christ? Are we going to see more finances through the backside of whatever some of our endeavors are. We're going to, become a more financially stable church.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, even the churches that are going through the process with us have that financial stability because they can typically tie giving to the church to something other than just obedience or just a challenge to give. And we're in a culture now that's not going to be enough, right?
Yeah.
And so we have churches that are taking the idea, like, for example, a mission measure of what it means to be a generous steward and beginning to help someone grow in the discipleship of generosity. And the next thing you know, we're having churches that are seeing anywhere from 25 to 30% increase in giving in a year because they were that passionate. Now, I'm not saying every church is doing that, but what I am saying is those are the types of return on the investment of time and everything, commitment that someone would give to going through a process like this because you have the clarity.
Yeah. So this is, it's 2020. And I think that you're talking about the return on investment, and I think that there are some implications there, I think, for churches, but there's also just maybe the thought that it's sort of like, well, we already have a lot going on, is 2020 a good year to go through this kind of process? Or, can you speak a little bit to that? In what way would going through a church unique type of process be able to provide some clarity into being able to navigate these just challenging waters that we are going through?
Yeah. Ben, once again, we could talk about this for so long, and tongue in cheek, and me doing my best to suppress sarcasm. I want to just say, why would you not, right? Why not? Who doesn't want clarity? Who doesn't want intentionality? Who doesn't want focus? Who doesn't want simplicity? Who doesn't want vision to be able to, and so, like, there's a part of me that just says that, why not? We recently engaged over 250 ministry leaders from around the country. And one of the first things that I shared with the team is that your mission matters. And here's the hard truth. If through COVID you have not made your mission matter, then I can guarantee your people have scattered. That if you don't make mission matter, they will scatter. You've got to consistently. And so why would we not go, listen, we may not have the clarity that we need, but right now there's no better time than to kind of rally the troops and sling out it. Now listen, there's also just in the world of timelines of all timelines, right? Of generation after generation, who would have thought that the most goal-oriented year of 2020 that most people have been looking forward to for the last 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 years, as we've got a 2020 vision. We can't wait to hit that 2020 vision. We make it to the 2020 vision. So theoretically and practically, Ben, that vision season's over, right?
Right.
We're at 2020. That 2020 vision has arrived. And if it didn't arrive, in many cases, for some people, ministry leaders out there, if it did, whether COVID just, took a baseball bat and probably knocked the breath out of almost any vision that many ministry leaders might have had, or of course, if they didn't have any, made it even worse. So I want to say, and I want to encourage ministry leaders that say, listen, right now is the time for you to get in front of the next year, the next 3 months, 3 years, the next 5 years, the next 7 years. There's no better time than right now to be able to really sit down and spend that incredibly important but seemingly non-urgent, right? now is both important and urgent, because if you don't put something out in front of for your people and for the people in your community, the people who need to be reached for Christ, I can guarantee you they're not going to show up at your church. We've seen a disengagement happen post-COVID as a part of COVID, and post-COVID, we're not sure how many is going to come back. You try to be a strong church with a lackluster vision moving forward, with a lack of clarity, with the inability to answer some of those questions, it's going to be a tough road. So I think there is no better time than right now, Ben, to do that.
Yeah. We have, for a lot of our new church plants, through the NAMB, actually, they go through, I believe, kind of a shortened version of the church unique process.
Right.
And I was just thinking, and then a couple of years later, then they have sort of like a touch-up, that it's something that they revise from time to time. It's not something that's set in stone. And I'm wondering if you'd be able to speak to a church that maybe has gone through a process, maybe a different process, but they feel like, oh, we visited, we did a programming planning strategy session or something. We did that 2 or 3 years ago, and so either they say it didn't work, or we're good for now. What would you say briefly to a church that's kind of in that sort of a thing, where it's like, oh, we kind of just went through something like this?
Yeah, and that's all the time. That happens all the time, and that is a part of almost every process in some ways. I will be in Springfield, Missouri in 2 weeks, and as a part of the process with that church, they had what we call vision equity. So some of those churches are going to have vision equity, and equity is just like what you have in your home. You've invested something there. It's something that you're not wanting to cash in or cash out, I think is the actual phrase they use, right? That you want to let that equity continue to grow. And so if and when you go through the process again, what it will do is it will help to solidify that. Here's what we find. We find that many church leaders go through the first time, and if they've gone through, once again, it may not even mean they've gone through all of it. They may have only gone through one piece of it or 2 pieces of it. Even going through it a second time can help anchor their first decision and really help them on implementation. That's a key aspect, especially when you hear things, we did that about 2 to 3 years ago. We really haven't done much with it since. We got the words. I would come back and say, well, you don't have the culture. If that's the case, you've not even begun. That's like saying, you've completed the race and you really only completed the first mile of a 125-mile ultra marathon run, right? There's so much more that's got to be done. We're working with the church. I mentioned them a few moments ago in Southern California. They went through the process 15 years ago. And every 2 to 3 years, they recalibrate their original process. God took them from literally the Lambs Fellowship, church running under 200 in worship attendance, and every 2 to 3 years, they recalibrate around their vision, their vision frame through Church Unique. And God's brought them the process that just pre-COVID, they were running around 3,200, 3,500 in weekend attendance, year over year growth, by staying focused and making sure that they were implementing and executing. And so there's a high accountability. But once again, that doesn't mean that if you go through the process again, that you're going to delete everything you've done in the past. We want to build on that, right? The Navigator is going to help you to build on that, help you to make that mission matter at a deeper level than it ever has before. So a lot of those questions have to get answered on a church-by-church basis because sometimes they're different. For example, one thing that's common out there that you've heard of is maybe a strategic planning process. And there's several organizations that do what we would kind of call a traditional strategic planning process, which I kind of call a strategic planning punch list, right? And what it is a punch list of things that they think they want to do next, but it's void of their identity and the direction. And we're going to come back and say, take a look at it. does what you've done before, is it helping you to have a stronger identity? Is it helping your mission to be able to be cascaded down into your leaders and into your congregation? Are your people living that mission? If you've gone through a process and you don't see good results, I want to encourage you to say yes to walking through this process with one of the certified navigators. It's going to really help them elevate and take it to a whole nother level. Most of us only know what we know when we kind of go through it the first time, and it takes a while to get the reps and to understand what it means to really integrate that vision and that mission at a whole nother level. Ben, that's a great question. And I would just really encourage that church leader to really reach out and have a good conversation about how the Navigator can take it to another level.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. Yeah, and we have, I'm excited that we have at least 5 in BCI in our convention that are certified to actually facilitate, to be navigators for churches, to go through the church unique process. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that will be something we'll be able to bring more clarity to more churches for sure.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm so excited about the team and their skill set, their capacity. Going to knock it out. I can't wait to hear stories of that transformation that's happening within the churches and within the ministry leaders.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us about Church Unique and bringing your passion. I always appreciate to hear how passionate you are just about the Church Unique process and the clarity it can bring.
Thank you, Ben. What a privilege. Thank you guys for your partnership, and we'll continue to be praying for you guys.
Thank you so much.